slides there. Yeah, so this is now broadcasting live. Good afternoon, everybody. There's Raniel in the background there. Raniel's going to be leading the session this afternoon, so I'm going to hand over to him now. So basically, you can sit and chat and introduce yourself, and then once you're done, we'll just then flip whatever's on that screen to be broadcast, and then take it from there. Currently, there's nobody watching. You can see down there 0 views, but it is being recorded, so it will be broadcast to however many people look at that. Okay.
Okay, shall we start? Right. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me and you're wondering why I'm here and Justin's not here, I'm Raniel Misra. Full-time job, I'm a senior manager at the AG. But other than that, I'm a CISA. Been a CISA for many years. I looked at my manual while preparing my notes, and another CISA laughed at me and said, "It's like 10 years old, man. You need to look at mine, you know." So, been a CISA for many years. I'm going to help you with chapter 4 and 5. I see my role more as a facilitator than as a lecturer today. I think you guys should have read through the chapter. Also, it's a few days late. I wasn't well for the last week, off and on flu bug, so I'm happy that I've recovered. And I'm here, I'm good to go. So we can get stuck into it. Maybe so.
Okay. See where the mouse is, that side.
Okay. Can I move this a bit to the right? Yeah, see it. No, wait, I got it this one. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. I think just for introduction, for my purposes, if you can just tell me who you are. Have you introduced yourselves to the group? So then you guys don't need to, and Bongi doesn't. You too?
My name is Catherine. I work at Deloitte. I'm risk advisory.
And it's also from Deloitte.
Okay, so you guys work with Riaz. Jakes?
Yeah.
I was with him earlier today discussing all sorts of other things. So, like I said, I'm an SM at the AG, CISA, member of the ISF as well as the soccer. A bit about me, I'm a family man, crazy about running and cricket. If you're interested in either of the children, you know, taking on the daunting task of running Comrades. So you can imagine me being sick was a massive scare at this stage, but fortunately, I don't need antibiotics or anything. I'm good to go. Okay.
First time.
I ran it last year and didn't make it. So, but this year, I've like tripled my workload, so I should make it this year. See how it goes. All right, chapter 4, very interesting chapter. Obviously, chapter 5 is what I'll spend a lot of time on today when we get into it, because it's a bulk of your CISA exam and what I regard as your make or break on the examination. Many people either get through because of chapter 5 or don't. I think Justin will share with you as well how important that chapter is. What can you tell me about the chapter from your reading? Chapter 4. We'll do 5. The presentation will flow and get into 5. I'm sure Justin will give you the presentation after. What can you tell me about chapter 4?
I think from chapter 4, being the auditor or FX auditor, a lot of the concepts we read and try to understand in chapter 4, we actually apply directly to our audit. Like chapter 3 was about acquisitions and managing those type of things.
Yeah.
We barely apply that, especially South Africa. Chapter 4 is very direct to what we do.
Okay. Chapter 5, I suspect, is more direct to that. But anyway, okay.
Chapter 4 was quite technical.
Yeah.
There are quite a few terms which
How worried are you about the technical terms?
I am worried. It's more network A+ side of IT as opposed to auditing terminology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except with the CP and the DRP right at the end of the chapter. But the other concepts, I think they were a bit challenging in the way that you find yourself Googling the term itself more than understanding how to apply it.
Okay. Okay. What approach are you going with in your CISA learnings, in your knowledge? Are you going with, I'm going to apply logic to the question and answer, or are you going with, I'm going to read out the textbook verbatim in there, hope for the best?
More logic to the question.
Yeah.
That's the approach. Most of the time we found.
Justin, what do you think? It's logic, eh?
Definitely.
I think
It's an experience as well.
that's exactly it. I
Knowledge.
think it's experience that counts more than what's sitting in that textbook, and applying that. And the exam is set up to actually detect that. I know of more people who've passed it, who've applied experience rather than textbook. I think the more questions you can get through, the more practice you can have at answering, the better position you're going to be in. That's the one tip I can give you is get through the textbook, get through the chapter, and then get stuck into the questions. The basics of what's in there you should know. I know the technical terms will always get you, but the logic that's sitting in there you should know, which is what I'm going to try and establish in you today, so that you leave here with that logic. How do you see my role? What do you see? What do you really want out of today? Because I don't think me explaining a technical term is going to help you, because that you can read. But what do you want out of today? Are there things that you want unmasked? Are there things that you want to understand better?
Maybe unpick the domain as a whole, and then the rest will be
Okay.
on us, because obviously you can't sit here and explain each and every item.
Yeah.
But
Just that high level summary.
High level summary. Okay.
Also just emphasize the key concepts.
And as things unfold, with group discussion, we can go through
Correct.
more.
Correct. Okay. I think for every chapter you should set targets. You should understand your goals and objectives, and as you said, you should have summaries relating to it. And that's really what will help. You need to ascertain in each chapter what's the golden thread. What are they trying to educate you about? You'll notice I have a slide right at the end. You haven't seen the slides, but I have a slide right at the end which says, what audits can you do after this? And actually delivery and practice will help you remember what can be done. Okay. So you're looking at operations and support, and it's broken up very broadly into quite a few of it. I'm not going to go textbook format specific. And we look at management of IS operations, infrastructure support, including computer operations, technical support, help desk, scheduling, controlling input, output of data, quality assurance. And let's just start with the first one, management of IS operations. What can you tell me about that? Can you start already painting big questions around this? And how would they question you around the management of IS operations?
They mostly give you scenarios. There's a question of management device operations. They give you a scenario and ask you for your judgment what would be the best or the worst thing in the situation. What with an auditor should be the best situation.
Okay. When you think computer operations, what comes to mind? Information systems operations.
General day-to-day activities.
Input, output of data. Batch processing.
Availability of
Who's
data,
responsible for
problem management.
Okay. So all of that sits in that bubble. But essentially what I would do, if I were you, think of an information system end to end, look at all of the operations that can fit in there and gain an understanding of how it's going to work. So your input process, your output, your standard basic processes, your standard basic procedures, and then looking at how an information system will function together with that. Right? In terms of infrastructure support, including computer operations, very important. It's important that you understand how to audit infrastructure support, what to look for, apart from just understanding the chapter, but really gaining an understanding of when you're out there in the field, what would you look for? Infrastructure is now looking at the hardware, the physical aspects of IT, the physical aspects that they have. So what would you throw in there? Server room management, hardware management, capacity management, looking at all those red flags, looking at how it's done, how it fits into computer operations, obviously what data sits on those information systems, on that infrastructure. Something that's becoming more and more prevalent is infrastructure compatibility. If you work in the field often enough, you find that what organizations are doing is taking age-old infrastructure and plugging in modern-day systems. It can't work. It will never work. So infrastructure alignment is something new that's come up. Moving on, technical support and help desk. Help desk test is fairly straightforward. You're looking at, do they have a help desk system? Famous system in KZN. 10 points for someone who can get it.
Hit.
What?
Not hit.
Maybe I'm old. Remedy. They still use Remedy?
No, I've never heard of Remedy.
Is it? What's Remedy?
I've
Still big,
never
right?
heard of it.
Okay, but a help desk system, you want to make sure that a help desk system tracks calls, right? It's auditable. It's got to track the call. It's got to have an input. It's got to have a closure. An organization that has a help desk should have a predetermined acceptable turnaround time. So those are interesting things to look for. Does CISA prescribe a turnaround time? Do they prescribe one here? So a call must be closed within 24 hours? Do they say that anywhere? Not there. No. Okay. But basically what I would look for if I was auditing it is that an organization needs to have a prescribed turnaround time. So they have to have an acceptable turnaround time. You have to have something that categorizes calls. So calls in terms of high, medium, and low. So you could get a question of, giving you different scenarios about how an organization will categorize a call. A call can be anything from, I can't gain access to this system, my password's expired, to I need a new module created. Obviously, you can't expect them both to turn around at 72 hours or 24 hours or 4 hours, whatever the case may be. What would be your most critical document on the technical support and help desk? Start thinking outside the box, guys.
Hello.
For organization-wide, think big picture. Policy and service level agreement. A question that can come out, one of those questions worth a little bit more marks would be an SLA. An SLA between business and IT as to how the help desk is meant to function. Very important. Help desk needs to have that. In terms of scheduling, we look at batch processing. How are schedules created? How are schedules done? Scheduling, what's important? Monitoring. Somebody checks that it's executed on time. Somebody checks that if a batch doesn't happen correctly, what happened thereafter? What did you do if a batch failed? Did you fail the control?
It will depend on what they do then, if it fails.
And what batches, correct. And how would you know that it failed? What would tell you that it failed, right? Generally, there's a success or failure indicator. The critical thing about a batch is when a batch is configured, when a batch is set up, think of transferring payroll batch being paid. If 950 of the 1,000 employees got paid, or it was able to process, should it process that file or should it kick it back? That depends.
It will depend on the tools.
Depends on how the tool is and how the system is set up. But what we don't want to see is 950 go through and it says complete. And the 50 is never followed, never tracked on. What we want to see is the system kick out an exception report that's auditable, traceable, and there needs to be an action point thereafter to make sure you get to a complete state. All right, quality assurance, I'm not going to touch on that. Change control and release management, very important. Change management. I'll take you back to why we exist. Why do IT auditors exist? The core of IT audit. Why was IT audit ever created? I was made to research this year because I had an issue with an internal audit function in KZN. Internal audit thought they had become the be-all and end-all and felt that IT audit was becoming less important. So they would fulfill our role. But why was an IT audit ever done? The simple answer is IT audits were created to provide a regularity auditor or an external auditor with the comfort that the system is functioning as intended. That's all. That is our only purpose. So that the IT system that's used to manage the finances of the business is functioning as intended. It's like saying the man sitting there doing his cash receipts journal and his balance sheet on a manual paper is functioning as he was made to function. That's all it is saying. And that's why we were created. The most important thing in any IT system to me is change management, managing changes. It is the one thing that we very easily as IT auditors can link to an assertion of regularity audit. We can fail an ITGC, we can fail an IT system on an incorrect change management procedure. So that goes back, Abdul touched on it, that it goes back to policies and procedures. What policies and procedures are in place to manage changes? How do you manage changes? How do you manage the release of those changes? And that's critical. In that whole process, obviously, maybe we take it as obvious, but the most obvious factor, the most critical factor is the approval of the change. How do we know that the change will function as intended? What processes and procedures do we have in place to verify that when we make this change, it meets the needs of the user, the requester, and it doesn't alter the system? Worst thing that can happen is you implement a change, it stuffs up the system. You can't pay creditors after that. Or you're duplicating payments to creditors. But change management is very important. From an auditor's point of view, what's important about change management?
Check also that the change was tested before it was deployed in production.
So that all changes that were made were authorized
Yes, but how do we establish all changes?
through the system. A lot of changes.
Correct.
Generated.
Now, this is the typical multiple choice question. How would you know? The first thing you test when you're testing changes is completeness. That's an assertion of audit. And the hardest thing to get in any system is to validate that you're actually looking at a log of all changes. So you need an audit trail firstly that's going to tell you the number of changes that are there. You also need that audit trail to tell you that the audit trail hasn't been edited. Because if that audit trail is edited, then the change could have well been processed. It's gone. It's been edited, it's been deleted, it's lost. Big banks have been victim of this. Massive. You put in a program to take 1 cent from every FNB customer, put it into your account. Trust me. No. You'll be very wealthy very soon. Okay? Simple things. It ties into configurations management. Often people ask me, when you're testing configurations management, what do we do? How would you test, and I'll go totally off the topic of computer operation, how would you test? What would you test it against? Whose standard? Best practice, international. Don't you think a client needs a document that will tell IT what the standard is, the procedure, the standards, the policies that the firewall must function under? So configurations management, think of it this way. It's like the blueprint to a building. It's like the plans of a house. That's what it is. It's the blueprints of the software. The configurations need to be something that's acceptable to management. And then it needs to be implemented. Key thing for you as an auditor is to make sure the configurations, as you see it or as it's been asked or requested, is actually functioning in the system. So it's built into the system. If it's not built into the system, it's not working. Simple thing, interest calculation or depreciation. Different classes of assets by different classes. A vehicle should depreciate differently from a wheelbarrow, right? The wheelbarrow needs to be flagged on the system as something. The vehicle needs to be flagged on the system as something. The system must be configured to automatically do it. We did a very interesting audited case in wildlife. How do you depreciate a rhino?
As it grows, suppose it loses its value.
We've been auditing. The AG's been auditing cases and wildlife forever, right? Nobody ever asked the question, how do you evaluate biological assets? No one asked the question. I was born and brought up auditing Tonga Dulets, sugar. So I get there excited, thinking about plants. Just certain plants are very valuable, like worth a lot, not just livestock now. So I asked, how do you audit biological assets? Guys are like, what? I said, how do you audit the value of your plants, your gardens? I think, blank. So then the guy asked me, so how do I know how many monkeys I got jumping up that tree? If each monkey is worth X, Y, Z, you don't know, right? That's something you can't do. But things like rhinos and those physical assets, they're assets. What do they sell a rhino for now? A rhino culling is about 100,000 rand. So, these are interesting things. But we're still not evaluating what a plant is, but biological assets are covered. They know what rhinos are worth. They know what their animals are worth, their livestock. The point that I'm getting at is configurations are very important. So having the correct configuration and built into the system. Itikweni charging customers interest on unpaid bills needs to be configured correctly. It's our job as IT auditors to make sure that's happening. That's revenue. Think about it. You get it wrong by 2%. You can quantify that, extrapolate it, eventually get to a correct figure that will give you a quantifiable figure that management have been missing in terms of revenue. You then bring in revenue recognition on the financial statement that becomes questionable. Single-handedly as an IT auditor, you could affect the audit opinion of the client. That's fun. That's the interesting stuff. That's the stuff that's outside the ITGC. You see, that's outside the bottom of what people would call as the normal, mundane, day-to-day ITGC. Right. Program library management system and control software. Why is it important? It's important to know why things are happening within the system, where it came from, and how it happened. My favorite, problem management procedures. Incident management. Ties into help desk. Many organizations have it together, but you can see how this picture comes together now. If you're running your own IT shop, incident management, you can see where it comes from and why it's important. Why do you think it's important to manage this process? What will it tell you? It's a famous CISA question. I got it. So other people get it. But it comes in different forms.
Personally, I think that's where you would, what the business would identify recurring
Is this
issues.
too cold? Sorry. Do you want to turn it up? No, I see everyone feeling cold. Just go. Yeah. Okay. Let's get going. What would incident management tell you about your organization?
Problems of okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe half a page.
Okay. So if the speaker doesn't work today, from an IT, whatever, they get there and they fix it. So let's bring it more real. If this module didn't pop up to today, we get people in, they work on it, it pops up. So what?
Efficiency. Efficiency.
It's one thing, it'll tell you how efficient your IT division is in turning around things. But strategically, if that happened every 15th of every month, it will start telling management something about the performance of the systems. Something needs to be done. Trend analysis. Once you start using these things to be a little bit more clever, it might tell you that your hardware is not coping with the load at month end or at payroll or at times when your creditors division is more busy. So you bring about more efficiencies because you know at that time you probably need to increase the load or the amount of infrastructure that's devoted to that system at that time. So you can manipulate and play with your assets. Trend analysis will help you establish where you're going wrong from an IT point of view, where your real issues and risks lie. Okay. It ties into performance monitoring and management. My first task was one day to go to a server farm and have a look at the performance monitoring of something. And senior of mine said to me, I must go there and look at the server, and if I see lights, I must get excited and document it. And if the lights are going green, then I must be happy. And if it has the way to go red, I must think, shut, things are working. But he was mad. So I went there anyway, I had a look at it, and then I realized he actually wasn't mad, because you need external and internal indicators when it comes to performance monitoring. So your system will tell you internally, like any hard drive would tell you, capacity management's a problem, system is not up for certain times in the day, but also externally, the health of the environment that the infrastructure is sitting in is also important. So from a performance monitoring and management point of view, you need that. How else would we manage the performance of a system? Would we look at number of transactions processed? Probably not, because that's more user-based. But we look at how fast it processes batches. We look at the efficiency within the IT system from a performance point of view. We look at how it functions when it's under pressure. We look at how the organization manages that. Is anyone monitoring capacity of servers? Sometimes something could be causing excessive amount of data to be produced on your server, which is slowing it down. Are people actually monitoring that? So those are the important things, and it goes directly to capacity monitoring and planning. We should plan for big data. Big data is here, it's a reality. Does the textbook talk about big data now? I'm sorry, I haven't read the 2015 text. Do you have 2015? No.
No, I couldn't talk. It's not changed.
Does anyone have a 2015? In South Africa, I was about to ask.
In South Africa, yes.
There's one.
Okay, because I mean, when we learned about capacity monitoring and planning, and when IT audit started, nobody heard the term big data. It's not there. Okay, nobody heard the term big data. But in all honesty, if you look
at data warehouses.
Yeah, look, so inherently we all knew about big data way back then. But if you look at the emergence of big data, it's basically the amount of automation and replication is creating volumes and volumes of data. And that is actually creating big data. Forget what you can do with big data, and forget what you can do from analyzing big data and how you can manipulate data to find patterns and trends and all those good things. That's all great. But what you can actually manage from a data production is becoming very important. Hence the emergence of clouds, because no longer is your normal server room adequate. You're producing so much of data. If you take our health information system, many patients who used to have manual records are now having digital records. And that trend will only grow. If you look at the e-health strategy, the strategy of government, the strategy of private organizations, there'll be less manual records and more digital records. I mean, the realistic dream of the Department of Education will be born where a child will be given a tablet rather than a textbook. It makes sense. A robust tablet costs 300 Rand from China. One textbook costs that. You know, it makes sense. And that tablet, if taken care of, could last a child for a long period. So the emergence and capacity of capacity monitoring has always been there. It's just become bigger and it's become more important. Physical and environmental security, many of you have probably visited a server room already. What is secure? What is leading practice tell us? Today's leading practice, what do we need? Access control, environmental control, flood protection, air conditioning, fire detection. What gas do they recommend now? FM200. Is it FM200, Justin? I don't know. Let me tell you now. Remember what gas they recommend in this book. They will ask that question. They will literally give you a scenario where an oak is trapped in a server room and this gas explodes and what will happen to him. But I'm not sure. When I wrote CISA, it was FM200. I don't know what it is today.
I thought there was a different number. Let's check with
Maybe. But you need to know what they are saying in that book is the right gas. There's a lot of gas out there. There's a lot of stuff that could do the job, but you need to know what is in there. It's a famous server room question. There was a gas that they once recommended, but it would kill a person in half a minute if they were still trapped in the server room. So that, I know a lot of people have stopped that. Was that CO2? There was CO2. If you're trapped in a server room with CO2 released, you'll die, right? Yeah. So then I think it went to F100. But just find out what's in that book, what gas is recommended, and sort that out. Okay, and then lastly, information security management, which I think we all should have a firm grip on, and it's covered in more detail in the next chapter. In terms of hardware, we look at components and architectures. What would you regard as important hardware components and architecture?
Overall,
The design, the compatibility. Is it in line with the requirements of the IT environment? How is it being monitored to make sure that it's still valid, it's still relevant, it's still the right level of hardware that needs to be in place? From an IT architecture point of view, it used to be a massive, massive thing, and it still is. The architectural layout of the IT system must have direct alignment to the needs of the organization, to the needs of the software, the demands of the software, the demands of software that comes out. I want to jump straight into the next one, which is your hardware maintenance program. Why do we sit here now and wonder whether the lights will go out?
Because it's quite a good probability.
Right. Why? Because there's no maintenance. The national electricity grid has not had adequate maintenance over a certain period of time. A maintenance program needs to start when?
Inception.
Inception, exactly. The day you purchase that server, the day you purchase that hardware, you need to start a maintenance program immediately. The day you build that server room, you need a maintenance program. You need to know when you're doing what, not when it breaks. It's far too late. It will not serve you if you don't do that. So this needs to be an auditable program. Generally, we find this thing sits with either SHE, which is Safety, Health, and Environmental Quality at an organization. It's called SHEC, or it sits with Risk Management. Or in its most dire state, sometimes it actually does sit with the normal maintenance guys. But a maintenance program needs to be in place. It needs to be auditable. Some people who have manage plants, manage mines, they actually have software for this. They buy maintenance software. They plug in their IT infrastructure onto that program and they monitor it from there. So it needs to be an auditable process. You need to see that there's planned maintenance in the year. What happened in the year? Was it maintained in the year? Did it happen as planned? And that needs to then be documented. Okay, we touched on monitoring and capacity management previously. Right, in terms of architecture and software, I'm going to get into a bit more detail here. From operating systems, access control, data comms, data management, database. It's an interesting section. What can you tell me about operating systems? Do you audit it like any other software? No. Okay, if you're doing an ITGC, right? You say, I'm doing an ITGC on the operating system, Pascal, and Unique. So do you look for the same controls to exist in your operating system?
From a domain perspective, like Outlook access, Outlook exchange control, but the way I go about testing it is kind of not the same as how doing an application.
Okay. Would you apply the same set of controls from a general controls point of view to the operating system? I think you would, wouldn't you? There are additional controls that you would look at from an operating system to make sure it's the latest updated version, it's been patched correctly. But essentially, when you're testing an operating system, I would look for a similar type of control set as I would on any other application in that environment, meaning that I'd cover the same level of user access. I'd look for the same level of user access controls. How do people get access to it? I will go deeper into who's got access, what can I call it? Administrator access. Who's got administrator access to it? Has the administrator access been protected? Is there a super user option still in place? Where I'm going with this is some organizations have a super user access username and password stored away somewhere that can be invoked should the administrator not be available and if there's a problem. So how have they protected those good things? It goes directly into access control software. It's very interesting the way we go about this, because there's two actual ways to do it. Is the software protected? So do you have access control over the specific software? If you do, great. Or do you have special access control software like biometrics and then single sign-on? So do I log in using biometrics and then I've got access to the whole suite on that desktop? Or do I have application level access control, which actually says that the username and password will sit per system? Okay? But essentially, you need to wrap your mind around access control software. This is really a question that I think you should, in your own mind, already know. It's an experience question. It's a question that you'll be able to answer from the experience that you have from testing access control. Data communication software and data management ties into what we discussed earlier in terms of how you manage data capacity and the right type of data and the data that's coming in. If we go on to tape and disk management systems, we discussed capacity and capacity management and how you go about it, but large and massive systems actually have detection systems to detect how is this being managed. How is capacity being managed? They'll issue warning signals that say, you need to change this disk, or you need the server. It's being put under huge pressure and so forth. How this will change in years to come, I don't know. Does the new textbook speak about cloud?
Yes,
It does. So it speaks about cloud capacity and cloud management. What
But
does it
not
say
very
about this?
much.
It's not much, yeah.
Not much.
It's like one of the
So it's
emerging
still server level.
Yes.
How you'd monitor the capacity of the
Pretty
server.
much. Cloud is still seen as being an emerging
Technology.
So,
Sure. Yeah, I think that's it.
okay.
Ford mentions it. Along
All right. Yeah.
So
So
it's not like a full chapter.
okay. So you're still covered if you
Cloud
understand.
governance.
If you understand server management, you should be still covered, and you should be still in a good position with that. All right. Utility programs are programs that function in the background to help you manage your system, to help it enhance the system, enhance the performance of the system. Let's just spend some time on software licensing. Why is software licensing a big issue?
Because the organization can be penalized for doing it right.
Massively.
Yes.
Massively. There have been some massive fines that have been dealt out by Microsoft, to name a few organizations that have really come down hard on organizations for not being software compliant from a licensing point of view. The bigger risk, so the one risk is you'll be fined. What's the bigger risk? It's an inherent risk. It's reputation. The reputational risk that comes with a fine of this nature is very damning for an organization. It says to shareholders that there's no controls. There's no management of a key issue like software licensing. So it inherently gives a shareholder an uncomfortable feeling, which can result in a share price dropping, which has now a direct financial impact on the organization. So the reputational risk is very serious here. How do you go about testing this? Simple tests like taking the number of users in the organization, making sure there's an adequate Microsoft licensing certificate in place, taking the number of users using SAP, making sure there's a proper software licensing agreement in place. Very important at this stage to look at service level agreements, contract management, test the process of contract management together with audit, financial audit. So look at how they are testing this process, what information they have about it, to understand how this will be managed in the organization. Right, looking at network infrastructure. What do you know about network infrastructure that you can tell me now from an audit point of view before I get into it? Firstly, there's three very important things about networks. That if you know those three, you pretty much have a broad. You might get away, you might not. But these three very important things. Diagram, very important. You're hot, you're not there. Topology. Your network diagram. Firstly, as an auditor, you need to have the comfort that the network environment is documented as it represents, or it's a representative version. The documented network diagram is a representative version of the actual environment. Now, when I was an IT auditor, when I did field work, I'd take the network diagram and walk the floor and say, show me this, on this, show me that. So I'd do a physical verification like you test assets, where I'll go sheet to floor and floor to sheet. So I'll also go and find servers, go and find routers, go and find network points and ask the guy, show me this on your diagram. Where is this? It has to. The simple reasoning behind it is, why is a network created? A network is created to support the IT environment, to support accessibility, right? I mean, Justin and I had a very interesting conversation just now. Funny enough, telecom goes down, power goes out here, and telecom goes down here. It does not make sense, because that network should be robust and independent of the electricity grid. So it shouldn't go down. Your telephone lines should still work. If you really roll that down in terms of disaster management for the city, if your power goes off, your telephones should still work, because that's part of their disaster recovery plans. They still have communications. But if things like that are happening, and if that's in error, and it continues to happen, then your telecommunications network becomes unreliable. So in the event of a real disaster, you now have it multiplied. So your network needs to be documented. Why? If you have a fault at any one point in that network, if something breaks down, you need to know where it is. The people who come in to help you need to be able to access that very quickly. So if you know those few things, that your network diagram needs to be documented and represent what's actually happening, firstly, that needs to be obviously placed on file somewhere. Somebody needs to know where it is. So that is why when you go to an environment and you say, can I see a networking diagram? And the guy says, can't see in 5 days. It realistically is saying to you as an IS auditor that should things go wrong here on the network, it's going to take him 5 days to even know where it happened, let alone how they're going to fix it. So if you know,
But I have a question. What if you go, because you go to other places, it's highly secretive. It's like one person, well, even though it's approved, but only one person has access to it. They don't want to share it with you. They don't want to give you a copy because it's highly. So what do you think of it not being communicated to the relevant people?
it's a tough one.
Does it actually exist?
Sometimes people are very defensive of the network diagram because they seem to think that if you know the IP addresses of the devices, you could then compromise the network from having that. The reality is, if you've got a network point where you can plug into that network, you can run a scanning tool, Nmap, Nessus, something like that, and you can very quickly discover everything that's on the network anyway. Okay?
Yeah.
So I think it's misguided. It's kind of that whole security through obscurity kind of approach. Somebody who's confident in their network, who knows that they've got proper standards in place, have got proper configuration according to the standards, or monitoring what's going on in the network, they'll hand over the network diagram and say, go out, do what you want with it. Okay? Because it's not going to compromise them. So I think that insecurity comes into it a lot. That's your first kind of, you talk about those red flags, you know, that something's not quite right here. That's your first red flag that you're probably going to have audit findings.
But is it necessary for the IP address to be on the diagram for us? Or could they give us one and we can say, well, fine, take the IP.
Depends what you're going to do with it. If you're going to take that network diagram and then run scans and then plan to security scan, then you need it.
Yes.
If you're just doing it for verification or for as is,
even there you might need it. How are you going to know you've got completeness? How do you know all the branches are on there, all the subnets are on there? Look, they may not want you to put it on your audit file and keep it indefinitely. But at the very least, they should sure that you use it while you're doing your audits, and then it can be returned to them afterwards if they're that worried about it.
Most audit firms also have confidentiality network specific contract, so that is over and above your audit. So you sort of sign it to say that you're not going to do anything. It really goes into the detail of how you protect the organization that you're auditing with that information. I mean, I've had to sign it a few times. So sure, no problem. Do you want us to wait?
No, you're okay.
Okay. If you roll this whole thing down, I mean, you can imagine in our space, we audit government, so trying to get access to a lot of the CISA network controls and access controls is very difficult because there's more than one department that sits on it, and you can understand from their point of view why they don't want to share it, because some routers you get access to it and you've got access to a whole world of information. So that is why it's protected in many ways. But what you do need to know is that needs to exist. You also do need to know and have a fair knowledge of the types of networks that they are talking about in your current year. So it scares me that you don't have the 2015, because there might be a network, because they can have the odd technical question on a specific network topology, isn't it?
Yeah, we've compared the 2014, 2015 manuals. There's hardly any difference.
Okay.
Even going back to the 2013, there's not much of a difference.
Okay, all right.
This is 2012, and I've got a copy.
You got a copy.
2014.
Yeah, so then
It's actually more than 2014.
Yeah,
Would you say there's more pages?
they've removed some pages and simplified a few sections, but there's probably only 2 or 3 sections within the manual where it's changed, and at most it's half a page to a page difference. It's really, so you're not going to be really compromised in any way,
But
having one or the other.
yeah, but I would say go through the types of networks, the types of network services they're expecting you to know, and what various standards and protocols they want you to be aware of. But essentially what you need to know is that when an organization needs to have a standard, a network standard, it needs to have certain protocols. It needs to have the firewall configurations that it's comfortable with. The network security layers that it's comfortable with needs to be documented. Why this is important is that is a message from business to IT to say, I want this level of controls in place. And thereafter, IT will go ahead and configure to make sure that's in place. It's also important that you identify when you get into an organization who's the network administrator. What is his level of authority? What can he do and what can't he do? What is his delegation of authority? Who's his reporting lines? From an audit point of view, how is his roles monitored? How is the network monitored from a performance point of view? So how does that tie into what he does? And how do you, also what's important to know is how do your applications fit into that environment? How do they fit into the LAN and the WAN, and where does it fit in? Which side of the firewall are your applications sitting on? Which side of the security layers do your applications sitting? Do they sit internally? Can external parties gain access to it? I'll get into just now, but access from outside the organization, so from outside the local network, how is remote access, how is that managed in an organization? And obviously your normal general controls that sit around access to the network and access to the infrastructure. Should we wait for him before we start? Okay. Can we pause or just leave it?
Just
have
leave
the
it running.
discussion.
Yeah. Any questions then on that? It's good to get a different view and insight onto a chapter.
I could feel Justin wanting to jump in on the network side, being a network and a security and an infrastructure guru. So go for it. If you wanna add, just add. Justin's got years of experience, guys. I'm sure you guys know that when it comes to these good things.
Last time we discussed around the OSI model, and there were questions around that. So we found some videos on YouTube. I've got the links, which I'll share a bit later, that you can just watch those. One of them is fairly simplistic, but start with that one. And then the other one's a longer, more detailed discussion of OSI models that you can then just kind of skip through it. And I think that helps explain better all the different layers and what it means by each layer, and gives examples and that after that.
But I cannot stress more. Go through your practice questions and try and gain a logical understanding of how that.
We do it in conjunction.
Yeah.
We do
Going
with each
back,
other. So we
reading
alternate. We
it.
do, it's an hour of theory and overview of the chapter, and then we spend the other hour doing questions, and then the following week is just
Yeah.
questions. And then we kind of go through
Yeah.
that cycle. But you're right, questions are critically important.
Using that mindset.
Yeah, you need to get in that mindset. You need to get in the groove of actually doing it. Yeah, I suppose I stuffed things up by not being well, now having to do 4 and 5 together, but
It's fine. It's a recap of 4,
Yeah.
and then it's going through
Going
5.
to 5,
And
yeah.
it's useful.
yeah. Only you might get your textbook after you write your exam.
I don't even think I'll get the questions.
It's ridiculous.
I just hope that they pay for exams before now.
They've done that, haven't they? Trust me, we can do magic with this Aka these days. We're about to start chapter
You
5.
can't prepare.
Hope you prayed for everyone to pass.
No, he can't prepare.
Huh?
He can't.
He can't pray.
They just make it extra.
They may not be automated.
You just put
So you've done the basics.
yeah.
He's automated. They may know.
He's not doing it. It's funny.
It's like a message.
Chapter 5 is a monster.
Encryption, and there are so many on that public
Yeah.
private. I actually drew a diagram to myself so I can try and understand it.
It's critically important to understand each of those legs and what's going where,
Yeah.
because when you start getting questions on that, you think you know it until you look at the question, then you start looking at the answers, and then you start getting yourself even more
I was
confused.
actually Googling, in example, Googling a diagram just to try and
So in my
to
model
visualize
things, I
it.
just have to
Bob
go
and
back
Alice.
to
Eh?
YouTube
Bob
and
and
let's
Alice.
see.
Yeah.
Chapter 5 is.
Oh, yes, there's Bob and Alice, yes.
Chapter 5 is critical.
That's what I sent you.
Anybody talking about encryption
Bob
with
and
public
Alice.
and private keys, you will get Bob and Alice.
Oh, really? That's what my diagram stemmed with. And then I scribbled my own one. And every time I got a question, I added to it.
Okay, we're gonna start chapter 5, and it's a critical chapter. It's very important that you go through it carefully. I often say it's a make or break with CISA. It does constitute a large part of the exam, right?
Yeah, I think it's
30.
30%. 30%.
Chapter 4 is 23.
So it's 30%, eh? Okay.
30, yeah, 60.
But essentially what it does, and I've added a bit of an introduction to it, just to introduce what it does. It looks at key components that ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability on information assets. The big CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I think if you apply that logic throughout what you're studying, throughout the questions you're answering, and think about that mindset, that really will help. Don't be afraid when you get a question like this to go away and write down a few things. And, they allow you to take in some working paper and do some work on the side, and then come up with your own answer, and then take your answer and look for it in the multiple choice. That's what I did. I don't know if that's what you did, but that's what I did for this chapter. So I'd often think of my own answer and then look for it, how my own answer would best fit something in those answers that are given. Because often with this chapter, if you go straight to the MCQs, you get confused. They're very close. You're not sure which is the perfect answer. Also remember, there's not only one correct answer, there's a few correct and there's most correct. So don't also spend hours on one question, because that can happen in this chapter. The chapter evaluates the design, implementation, and monitoring of logical and physical access to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The chapter also evaluates network security, environmental controls, and processes and procedures used to store, retrieve, transport, and dispose of confidential assets. The chapter describes the various methods and procedures followed by organizations and focuses on the auditor's role in evaluating these procedures. I could almost say that this could be a business in a chapter. You could go away and build a life just testing this, basically. That's how critical this one chapter is.
Sorry, you said at the end of when you discussed chapter 4, that what audits we could go away.
Yeah, no, I'll do it right at the end.
Okay, so we'll do it at the end of chapter 4.
No, it's the last slide for today. Okay. And we look at the importance of security management and key elements of information security management. One of the most important things, and if you think I'm taking too long on something, because I see it's already 6 o'clock, just let me know. Okay. Senior management commitment and support. Why do you need that? Why would you think senior management commitment and support is very important for this? One at the top.
They take the decisions.
They take the decisions. They're the policy drivers. They're the policy implementers. They also have this. They also provide and authorize money, expenditure. Good security comes at a price. Good information security controls comes at a price. Paying us to come in and audit your environment comes at a price. Doesn't just happen. We're costly. It's expensive to employ an audit firm, an audit organization. So you need to have very, very robust and engaged senior management, and their commitment and support is important. Often the breaches and leaks happen at that level. Strange, eh? It does. Because when you want a password changed and you're the CEO of an organization, you don't want to follow a queue, you don't want to phone a help desk, you don't want to log a call. You want to phone your PA and say, get this thing done. And then all of a sudden, the guy on the other side is listening to your PA until the day your PA decides it's time to get this organization for every bad thing they did to me, resets a password, gets in, swipes a few rands, and there you go. So commitment and support from senior management is very important. I cannot stress that. I base every audit that I do, every audit that my department does on what? Policies and procedures. Those of you who've worked with us know that that's how we work, that's how we function. There's no policy and there's no procedure, it doesn't exist. I don't care how good your control is. I don't care how well your password is set. You can have password settings of 16 characters, alphanumeric, this, that, and the other. If there's no policy and procedure behind that, I will still write that finding. Why? Why would I do it?
Because you can't measure what they do against anything.
Correct.
You can't penalize them because anyway it's not documented anyway.
Exactly. Tomorrow, if the IT administrator decides to make that password setting 0, how do you hold that person accountable? And also, what are you auditing against if there's no policy and procedure? You're auditing against leading standards and best practice. But then you're stuck in that bubble of, I'm auditing against best practice. And the organization says to you, but I don't adopt best practice.
It's not relevant.
It's not relevant to me. I run a mine where miners are here and they don't want to change passwords every 30 days. Which is fine.
Executive management doesn't want to change password every 6
Or executive management don't want to change it, which in my world is fine. But then you have a policy to support that. And you say, I'll change it every 90 days. But that password will have more stringent controls. It will be your wife, your daughter, and your late grandmother's name all in one. You know?
Write an essay.
Yeah. Or we will decide you don't need passwords. We'll use biometric or something else, or pattern matching. You know, it needs to be documented. Can't stress it enough. Policy and procedure drives everything.
I think the policy is inadequate.
Then you fail it at policy level. Then you don't even go forward. You go forward. No, you go forward thereafter. You move forward to test implementation as a value add. If a policy and procedure is inadequate, you fail a control at that stage. The policy and procedure needs to be amended to some sort of configuration that's acceptable, but you can still proceed with testing as a value add for that organization.
Yeah, look, if you look at it, the accountabilities are different.
Yeah.
Who's accountable for policy? Senior management.
Yeah.
Okay. When it now comes to compliance with the policy and actually configuring the servers and settings to match the policy, that's the administrator guy. If we go to the administrator and you say to him, well, your policy says 5-character long passwords, but we don't like 5 characters, go and change it to 8. If he does that, he's in contravention with policy. Go and read the policy. The policy probably says he can be disciplined if he contravenes the policy. So you're going to tell him now that he must contravene the policy and risk being fired? You can't. You're going to have to go back to senior management, convince them the policy is wrong, get the policy changed, and then only can the guy go and fix it. All that guy on the ground can do is comply with policy. If there's no policy, then it's different. So better to sometimes have no policy than a bad policy.
Yeah, yeah. A bad policy is the worst thing. It really, really spells out disaster. Or a policy that's too thin. In other words, it's not. It's a high-level document that can be misconstrued because it's not direct. The flip side of that is a policy that's too detailed for a small organization. Can happen. I saw one IT policy that was 3 files, and this is like a small art gallery. And some IT guy made huge amounts of money coming there and selling this fantastic suite and left. And this IT, the CFO phones us, what am I going to do with this? Well, clearly you can't implement it because you're not going to hire a CFO anytime or a CIO anytime soon. So, so these things need to be specific to the organization, which is what the next point says. I'll move on to security awareness and education. Very important, critical. Why? Best policy in the world that sits on a shelf and no one else knows about it. So what? At the end of the day, I can't hold you accountable for something that you've never read and signed. So an acknowledgement from each user in the organization to say they've read and they are aware of what the policy says. Individual winds up surfing Facebook all day, yet it's prohibited in the organization. The firewall didn't pick it up. Internet security settings didn't block him. That's what he's done. How do you hold him accountable if he's never signed the IT security policy? He's in breach, and he must be brought to disciplinary action if that's the case. So awareness and education. Organizations often battle with this because every time there's a change and you get 10-point version, IT security policy version 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, do you get someone to sign every time? A workaround is you have an option on your sign-on to say, by signing in, I am acknowledging that I've read the IT security policy. If you need to know where it is, click here. Organization is protected. Simple. Okay. Monitoring and compliance. The policy needs to be monitored. The compliance needs to be in place. I don't know if you wouldn't have seen, but I was planning on doing an ISACA chapter meeting at the next one, presenting on what I termed the reverse swing of IT auditing. I'll spend a minute on this. I want to create a world for IT audits where, like your CFO or your accounting officer would present your financial statements and say, "Here, Mr. Auditor, here's my financial statements. This is what this organization is doing." A world where a CIO will give you, as an IT auditor, "Here's my IT audit statements. This is a statement from me to you saying that these controls are in place. This is how I monitor and this is how I measure compliance," similar to SOX. And then we audit against that. Because what standard are we auditing against? So we audit against that statement. Like the financial auditor proves the debtor's balance, we will audit that audit statement to say that these controls are in place. So I've done the work, I've got the statement, I know how to go about it. I need buy-in from people. And the reverse swing came from the fact that I love cricket, but it's changing the way IT audits are done because we can't continue because we always get asked a question, against what? And we say, ISACA says where? Pull out your CISA textbook. It's not going to work. Okay.
Yeah, that's, if you look at the auditees side of the thing, we've been talking largely about immature auditees. If you go to a mature auditee, they do not want the situation where they have internal audit maybe is a Deloitte, external audit is a PwC, and then they've got some other third-party auditor, and every auditor that comes there wants something different.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not possible to work in that environment. So that's where they then start to have very mature policies and standards. They have their minimum control frameworks, and everything they do is according to some framework or other. Then as an auditor, when you go into that organization and you now want to audit something, they say to you, have a theoretical discussion with me about my framework. Let's show that my framework is correct. Now you go and audit me against my framework, nothing else.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's a mature organization trying to do exactly what you're saying about making those assertions and statements.
And that will unmask this whole thing, because we get into a point very fast as IT auditors where we're being questioned and saying, how relevant are you? Because you keep on testing me on these weird things that I know nothing about, and you keep on changing the goalpost. I don't know how I'm ever going to comply. But anyway, we can talk for hours, so let me get through the theory first.
It's like we're there to find findings.
Exactly. I think you and I get it more because of the space that we play in, but yeah. Information security management roles and responsibilities. I'll touch on the highlights here, but in any organization, information security management, the roles of people are very important. The responsibility, the delegation of authority is very important. Playing down mature environments, your IT steering committee has to be in place. An IT steering committee must include an exec or a senior member from business, somebody who can represent business, someone who can represent finance, infrastructure, someone who can represent the organization to bring their needs to that table. If you have only IT people there, that is all they'll think. They might wind up buying the most fantastic computer in the world when they don't need it. And they might commit the organization in a direction that it really is not going. Wild example, the organization might be a furniture store and might now want to start selling groceries. It's a reality, it's happening every day in our country. Game has started selling groceries. So that IT need now says, we need a module that's going to capture cabbages, which is slightly different inventory to bicycles, because bicycles probably come in once a month. Cabbages come in daily, so we need a faster point of sale system to capture the quantity. But what does the IT environment doesn't know about this? They don't know what's going on. They're living in their own world. Next minute, truckload of cabbages arrives. They don't know what to do. What did they take their money and did, their IT spend? They built a new server room. Yeah, they built a new server room. Right? Or they bought themselves great laptops that they can access while they're in wherever. In the shower, perhaps. Yeah. Okay. So that need from business needs to come, and the steering committee is a fantastic place for it to come. The security steering committee will flag your incidents, will flag your security issues, will flag the number of times organizations' penetration attacks have happened. South Africa is now being seen as the most, I don't use the term weak, Justin, but vulnerable. One of the most vulnerable places in the world for attacks, cyber attacks, cracks, EFT attacks. I was put in my place in no uncertain terms at the last ISACA chapter meeting that I presented at. It got heated. I was being proudly South African. But the reality is South Africa is vulnerable. I think like the rest of the world. I honestly believe we're not more, but we're equal. The rest of the world is vulnerable, so are we, right?
Possibly more so because of lack of skill, lack of
Correct.
budget, all those kinds
Lack of awareness.
Could be because of the legislation.
Well, there's all sorts of reasons, and that's one of them, the red tape. But we are vulnerable. So your security steering committee needs to flag all of this and needs to pick it up. Your executive management needs to buy in. Going into terms like security advisory framework, chief privacy officer, chief information security officer, these are great people, great things that we'd like to see in big organizations. We don't often see it, but they all have a role to play. I'm going to touch on process owners. Why is a process owner very important?
Understand control systems.
Correct. But he also understands the process. outside of the system. So he must make sure that the system is always delivering as intended from a process point of view. Let's assume you have a system change. Your process owner must ensure that the process is still functioning. If your job is to sell and you're a process owner of sales, your system must support that process. And that's how you become a process owner and a system owner, because you're the master of that process, regardless of where it sits. Most difficult person to find, but very important, because no one wants to own the system. External parties, why are they important? South Africa has many service providers who play different roles. Lot of outsourced work. There's massive IT shops that are built solely for supporting organizations, and external parties become a massive role player. What would you look for? Most important auditable product? The SLA. The SLA is key. Key things in your SLA become very important. Performance measurements. Can we measure the performance of the third party? How do we measure it? Is it something tangible? Can it be physically done? Do they provide reports to us? How often do they provide reports? What's the agreed term? Is the contract valid? Has it been signed by the right parties? All of that. In other words, it must be a legally binding document that could stand its ground in court. What do you think ESCOM's service level agreements? All right, your security administrator. I think his most important role is obviously to make sure the correct level of security exists in the organization, but more importantly, is to make the organization aware of all known risks. I say known risks, why? You as a user in an organization should be aware of known threats, because your administrator should be aware of this. That's his role, to get up to speed, to learn about it, to put in preventative measures to protect against known risks. Hackers, crackers, intruders get clever every day and more clever. And that is why we have certain patches that are sent down. We have new security settings, new interesting policies and procedures that can help with this. That's why we say known threats, because the known threats keep on changing by updates. Okay, and then IT developers and IS auditors obviously have a role, which we all are aware of. Inventory and classification of information assets. I put a little paragraph there. It says effective control requires a detailed inventory of information assets. It's like asset management. Now, I might take a few things for granted here, but are we all aware of how asset management functions? It's like managing an asset in a financial audit. Not really very much different, but how do we know where our IT assets are? An organization needs a clear and defined way of managing an asset, of knowing how their assets are managed. So the good things like asset tagging, asset monitoring. You need an asset register. If I tell you go and find his laptop, you should know where to find it. You should know who's got it, whether he's handed it in for repairs or whether it's physically with him or it's at a client and so forth. So it's relative value to the organization. Your servers need to have a fixed fee. Big organizations, server farms are worth millions. Massive. I mean, banks, one of the biggest physical assets they have, apart from money. Servers. It's their server rooms, their server environments. It's location, it's security risk classification. Now that's critical to IT. Security risk. You can't have your server room walking out the back door. It's impossible. So it has a security risk to it. So its protection will be there. I'm sure you all know the great stories of the South African banks and how their server rooms are protected. Justin, you know about all of these things. The standard banks and the net banks. I mean, these server rooms are literally, I don't know how many feet underground. Seriously, to get to it, you won't get to it. You need to break into Fort Knox.
Some of these places are like bunkers.
Yeah.
Even here in Durban, you've got some. If you go, for example, for Engine, if you go to their server room, that concrete is like 0.5 meter to 1 meter thick.
Yeah.
It's got positive air pressure there, so that when you open the door, the air comes outward, so that no dust goes in.
It's like a movie.
It's exactly that. It's like, it is that.
You go there and you speak to guys, you're like, no, ask your physical security, and they're laughing at you. They're kind of saying, if a
Or
plane
you
crashed
fail
into
us
this
on-
building,
yeah,
it'll
that would
damage the
happen.
plane, not the building.
Yeah, I don't know which bank it is, but I know their server room starts 6 floors down.
Oh.
So you got to get down there. It's crazy. So it's the protection of that asset. It's asset group, like we spoke about, who's the owner, who's in charge of it, and who's the designated custodian. That's slightly less important, referring to laptops and those good things. We spoke about system access per permission. You need to work out, you need to test, you need to have a look at what policies and procedures are there to drive system access. How is it protected? Then you need to physically go and verify that that's actually functioning. So firstly, there needs to be a policy. So a way, a route that's defined, I'll put it in layman's terms, a route that's defined as to how you get access to that system. How would you gain access? Or how would a new user gain access? Or how would you grant access? What level of authority is required? Is there a form? Is there a computer access request form? I don't know what is out there, but you need to basically, an organization needs to have some level of control. That control needs to be an auditable process. How would you measure completeness? So if you go to the access log of ACPAC, it needs to tell you in the last financial year, 20 users were added. This is how you will test completeness. You then take those 20 users and you say, can I have all these forms? You can't go and take the file with the forms and say, there's 5 forms, these 5 were added, shut, I'm out of here.
Concept with the change.
Yes, it's from the system. That's how you measure completeness. And completeness on this is the most important test, nothing else. Also, the form should dictate what level of access. Is it an administrator? Is it just a normal user? Is it a clerk? And so forth. There needs to be mandatory and discretionary access controls. Obviously, users who have access to more critical access need to have more robust and more interesting controls. Privacy management issues and the role of IS auditors. IS auditors will basically police privacy management. How is that put in place and what's happening? How do you measure success in information security? It needs to be documented. What will dictate success? 5 months without attack? I don't know, whatever it is, but it needs to be an auditable process and it needs to be in place. Information security and external parties. When external parties gain access to your network, to your system, how is that policed? What's in place to make sure they follow correct protocol? I had a very interesting story the other day. I said, we found a user account, like an admin user account that wasn't renamed. I said, why is this thing not renamed? He says, well, that's not used by us. Excuse me? Who uses it? Well, the third party uses it. Who's the third party? The service provider who supports our asset management system. Okay, how do they gain access? Oh, we don't know. They just log in, do their thing, and they're gone. That's unacceptable. Their access needs to be tracked. You as an IT manager, as an IT administrator, or an IT auditor needs to test to verify that when they need access, it's granted for that period. The owner of the business or the management of that business knows what they're logging in to do. When they're done, that access is taken away. You can't have a third party, external party gaining access to your organization willy-nilly and whenever they want to. It's impossible. It just won't work. Unless, of course, they own the system. Then I really don't know what you're doing if that's the case. All right? There needs to be a third-party agreement. As we've discussed, we need a very robust SLA to keep it going. Computer crime issues and exposures, I'm not really sure what that means, but it probably means that if there's a computer crime or there's an incident that's reported, it's monitored and tracked to completion, and it's an auditable process.
They just name all the different
Types of crimes.
Yeah, so it's all the different.
Okay.
Are we supposed to know all of them?
You could do questions on those.
I've got a few recently.
Yeah, for some multinationals, some of those things are extremely important. If there's legislation, for example, that says you can't deal with certain countries.
Appreciate it's denial of service. They attack. They ask. I got like 2 questions on that.
Yeah. So there's lots of reasons for needing to know that.
Yeah.
So
But that you just read through.
read it, understand it. Again, if there's things in there that you specifically don't understand, put them one side, we can talk about them.
Yeah, I think critical. Get through it. Go through it. The different types of attacks. Like I remember that now. Denial of service attack. There's various different attacks. There's so many attacks that an organization could have. But can you imagine being a web-based organization and you get a denial of service attack? And like Kalahari's out of business now, isn't it? Amazon.
Kalahari merged with Takealot.
Okay, Kalahari merged with Takealot. But can you imagine Amazon having an attack like this and then they're down for days? You know, the huge loss. The reputation, the implications is massive. Okay, and then security incident handling and response. How do you respond to a security incident? Do you respond? Do you tell the media? If you're a bank, when do you tell the media? If you've lost 500,000 of a client's money, do you tell the media? No, probably not. You need this documented in a policy and procedure. Every time there's a hack, does your IT administrator run around the business and say, you know, we've been hacked, and then it gets out in the media, and then everyone wants to know with Poppy around there, how much of the information's gone and how much can we sue this organization for because they've let our information into the wrong person's hands. Those are all important red flags you need to be aware of. With Poppy coming, does this book won't talk about Poppy. Poppy is a South African thing, but it changes the slightly. In fact, we won't talk about it because it's 6:20. but Poppy has its own risks.
Protection of personal information is a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
The Poppy Act in South Africa was based around, I think, German or some other EU
Yeah,
legislation.
yeah.
So it's a global issue.
It's a global issue. I mean, the protection personal information should never. Any organization that has personal information should have a plan in place to protect that information. That's basically what Poppy is saying. And that plan needs to ensure that it is protected. Okay, logical access. We look at logical access exposures, data leaks, viruses, worms. How would logical access break down? And then thereafter, what happens? So it's important to understand and gain an understanding of how logical access is protected in any organization and how a breach is prevented, and is it monitored and is it protected? I know you guys need to leave, so we don't have much to go. Social engineering, massive. It was massive when I wrote CISA, and it's now even bigger. You know, how much of information can be given out. I don't know if you've ever seen that security video that what's the company in KZN who plays it with the car guard?
No.
They sponsor the Sharks. Okay, but anyway, the video goes like, eventually, people get access through social engineering to your IT environment. Pick up the phone the IT administrator. Hi, I'm your new IT manager. I don't have access. Can I gain access using your account? Can I have username and password? Oh, cool. Gives it to you. Before you know it, the guy's in. He's at a desktop because it's lunchtime. It's unlimited. Yeah, the Unlimited have a very nice video about this and how through social engineering and through just gathering information, things can be done. I can phone you and all of a sudden I have your ID number, but I actually have all of it already because I could say to you, I've got this great job for you, whatever, send me your CV. Before you know it, I've opened a bank account on your name, I've acquired an overdraft, I've smuggled the money out, and I'm gone. These are the risks. And it's purely, you and I know never to do it. Do our friends know never to do it? Probably not. It's awareness. Where I'm going with this is there needs to be an awareness campaign in the organization about social engineering. Parts of logical access and how does an organization manage it? Do we have logical access control software? Like I said, biometrics on top of an IT system, like KZN provincial government has. It's great. No one can perform a transaction there without knowing who it is, unless they stole your finger. Hello, you're responsible. And it's eliminated a lot of stuff. That is a great thing that they have. So those are the interesting things that people are coming up with. But ultimately, what you need to know from an audit point of view is that in logical access, there needs to be identification and authentication. The user must have some way of identifying who they are, authenticating and logging in. Username and password is fine, covers that. Why do we need that? If they perform a transaction, we need to trace that. We need to be able to go back and say, this is what's happened. This is who did it. Cool? Okay. It goes on to log on IDs and passwords. Token devices, one-time password, that's additional software. Some organizations will give you a token. You guys probably have a token, right? Deloitte has a token to log into the system?
Like the RSA software.
No.
Yes, it does.
A RAS token? No.
It does.
No. Okay. Some organizations have a token on top of your password. So when you, for example, logging in to submit your timesheet, it will ask you for that.
It's like your bank will send you.
The bank.
Correct.
And I know some, you get those little things as well.
Yeah,
to
those-
press it, that's
Yeah,
good.
security, those numbers change all the time.
Capitec
My
has,
dad one for his
yeah,
company bank.
Capitec, Standard Bank has one. It's a randomizer. It randomly generates a code
Net
that
bank
can be
does.
used. NetBank SMSs you a code on your
Yeah.
phone, but it's a random code. It's the same thing. It's a token. It's identifying that is you. Biometrics, I think single sign-on is greater than having passwords at each level, my personal opinion. But basically, as an auditor and for the purpose of CISA, you need to know that something needs to be authenticated before someone gains access so that we can nail it down to that person. If you have that mindset, you'll answer a question. That the reasoning behind this is to work out who actually performed that transaction. Think of it in the simplest terms of you performing a bank transfer. How would you know it's you? How would your bank know it's you? If you know how to log in, you know the username, you know the password, plus the additional token password, chances are it's you, or there's a gun to your head. You know? Okay, authorization issues, access control lists. We need to know who has access. Who are these people that have access to our system? Remote access security. It's a total new ballgame. Somebody gets access remotely to the system, changes things. Access via 3G. It's slightly more mature now because there's more mature environments and softwares that give you access to the systems. Okay, and then mobile technology. You know what? I could touch on this, but then we'll be here till 7 o'clock. Just talking about it. It's a pet hate of mine. It ties into bring your own device. I've got everyone has email on their phone. Who changes that password? How often does that phone make you change your password? You know, the computer will do it every 30 days because the system will tell it to, or the software will tell it to. But your phone, you could check email, you know, unless it's an office-given device, there's often not enough security on it. Roll that onto an iPad and things get chaotic because there's all sorts of other things that are happening, okay? Storing, retrieving, transporting, and disposing of confidential information. Storing, retrieving, and transporting, you guys should have it down. Disposing of confidential information. How do you dispose about it? When you go into an organization to do an audit, you need to test, do they have an asset disposal plan? IT assets. What is their plan to get rid of this laptop? What is their plan to get rid of the data? If you've simply deleted it off it, Justin, you'll back me up here, it can be retrieved.
Oh, absolutely, very easily.
If you delete a file, it's not gone. If you delete a picture, it's not gone. It's there somewhere. Someone will get it back. There's a method to dispose and wipe a device completely. And it's not something that an organization can just say we delete or we format the hard drive and so forth. There needs to be an actual plan to make sure this is happening. It needs to be tested. There needs to be documentation on file to say that it functions as intended.
These days, a lot of these devices are leased, especially laptops, multifunction copiers, printers, all of that. So you have to be very careful there that at the end of the contract, you now need to hand this back to the leasing company. Who's responsible for wiping all this stuff? How do you do it? You can't simply take the hard disk out and physically destroy it because it's got to go back to the leasing company. They want it back in a form that still works. So how do you do that?
Okay, under network infrastructure security, communication networks, wide area or local area networks generally include devices connected to the network as well as programs and files supporting the network operations. If you remember that term and you remember why it exists, and then you tie in all of the theory that comes with it, you should be fine. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of them because there's copious amounts of information in the textbook on this. But essentially, your mindset needs to be focused around how do I secure my network? What steps, what measurements, what has this organization done to secure the network? How have they done this? And the different levels of security we look at is LAN security. So firstly, how is the network, the LAN, the local area network, secure? What have they done and what have they put in place? Now, the different levels of security is in your textbook. You need to know it. You could get a question on it. You could get a technical question in this area. Your client-server security, so between your user, between your server, between gaining access and retrieving information, putting information on, taking information off. How is that security working? Wireless security, as well as getting access from outside. What processes, what procedures, what's in there, and what are the different types we need to go through. In terms of internet threats and security, I think there's like 10 pages in there of the different threats and security, right? Internet threats and security.
Is that the wireless threats?
No, I think there's a separate one on internet.
Wireless
5 pages, yeah. But go through all of that. Understand what they are talking about, what they're making reference to, what are your different types of threats. I think this is just one of those things you're just going to have to swat off and have it in your mindset. Because when you're auditing, the reality is you're going to get in there and you're going to say, right, how do you protect yourself? How do you protect yourself from an internet attack? Then you're going to get a document, a policy, a procedure. It's going to say how. You then look for those configurations within the security systems, and then you verify it. Okay, what I would say is important from a firewall point of view as an IS auditor, that there's a plan in place. There's defined settings that the organization has agreed to, and then you need to validate that exists. We'll take questions on it after we're done. But basically, when you're auditing in this space, you need to ask yourself, what are the types, even to demonstrate and to acquire the logic of getting through the chapter and getting through the questions, you've got to ask yourself, what are the types of audits I can do out of this from an application point of view? When I'm applying this in the real world, what can I do? You can do many audits from these two chapters. You can do an IT general controls review. You can do a security review. You can do a theoretical security review. You can actually go and then do a physical security review where you're physically scanning the network and looking for known vulnerabilities. You can do a mobile protection review. How robust and how well does this organization protect itself from a mobile attack? How do they look after bring your own device? Your information assets. How are they managing information assets? How are they managing their capacity? All of these are revenue generating reviews that organizations often don't think of. And lastly, you need to ask yourself, why would you audit it? Go through all of that and say, why would I audit this policy? Why would I audit this hack? Why would I audit this threat? Okay, that brings us to the end of it. That's my bit. We can deal with questions, Justin.
Thanks very much, Raniel.
Yeah.
It's great to have a different perspective on things and hear a different voice.
All right.
I think the more different perspectives, the more different insights everybody has, the better equipped they will be when it gets to the exam and you get questions coming from different angles.
Yeah.
So we do appreciate it.
Thanks.
You.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Raniel.
Thanks. Perfect, guys.
Okay, so you should have all read at least half of what's in the chapter. So what were the key areas that you struggled with in terms of reading through the chapter? Sure.
I found the encryption to put together.
Okay. The encryption, it gets quite technical. The different kinds of encryption, the different kinds of keys, how they've got to be secured, what the purpose of the different kinds of encryption are. So all of that can be a little bit complicated. And I think you're taking the right approach of trying to find a diagram that kind of summarizes and shows you visually how these things get communicated. The other thing that helps is to start looking at practical applications of these things. So when could you use different kinds of encryption? And think in your everyday life, how do these things get used? It looks a bit foreign when it's in the book on the pages there, but we do use encryption in everyday life.
That's why I like that one example is like Jill and
Bob and Alice.
Jill and John. They use this an email example, sending an email. And that's simple, but it puts it into perspective.
Where did you get that from?
I just Googled it. I think I just Googled public private key encryption diagram.
Oh.
And then it came up.
When they explain encryption, that's like the most famous.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like we are studying as well.
Yeah.
Like Alice.
I'm sure it's seen that. That one.
Yeah, so if you look at the whole public-private key, it sounds complicated. It sounds like, well, when would I ever use this? In reality, you use it every day. When you browse the internet, you get websites which come up as HTTP. You get websites which come up as HTTPS. Every website coming up as HTTPS is a digital certificate involved. That digital certificate would come up with an error message if it was self-signed. So that means it's issued by a third-party issuer, a certificate authority. Okay? So that means you're now using what is written there. So think about how that works, what the purpose is, what it achieves, and then you can start to see how these things come together. If you think about information that gets sent to you by organizations, so sometimes you get these PDFs, and they say to you, use your ID number to unlock this PDF. Okay, what is that ID number? On one hand, it's a password, but it's also a decryption key. Okay, but what kind of encryption is it now? Is it asymmetrical encryption or is it symmetrical encryption? Okay, it's a piece of information that they've used to encrypt it with, and you use the same piece of information to decrypt it. So that's symmetrical. Okay, so think of those practical examples, and then it helps understand what it is they're talking about and when you would use these different things. Yeah. The reason that those organizations can do what they do is because they're using a piece of information that they know, and it's a piece of information that you know. The problem is that so does every one of your family members and every company that's ever employed you, and probably every recruitment agent that's ever spoken with you, and a whole lot of other things. So it may not be the most appropriate choice, but the reality is people are doing it anyway. They're kind of relying on the fact that if some random person intercepted the email with that attachment, they wouldn't know your ID number, and they would have to go out of their way to find it. And hopefully your ID book isn't a piece of completely public information that's published on the internet somewhere. So it'll take a little bit more effort to go and find it. But it's not a purely private piece of information. If they went into the credit check on you, they could probably find your ID.
Yeah, it gets on very.
It would require effort. So then it would be a targeted attack
Yeah.
against you as opposed to a more general kind of thing. But it's not a difficult thing to do.
But as I said, it would require effort. It can't be accidentally done.
Yeah, it would, it would definitely be deliberate. Okay. So what are the other things then that you were back on within this chapter?
For me, in terms of the text here, I found that, I know this concept, but I've been kind of confusing the technical terms. Like in terms of, like they ask questions about spoofing, identity phishing, so I had to go back and and read the book.
Yeah. With those kinds of things, it's important that you're precise. Because if you kind of think, yeah, I know what this term is, but there's 5 different terms, and when it comes down to it, you don't actually know the difference between it, they're going to get you, because they're going to give a question, you're going to read the question, you're going to think, I know the answer, you're going to look at the answers, and then suddenly you're going to realize, oh, I don't know the difference between spoofing and phishing and spear phishing and all these things, and then you're going to get into trouble.
What I would do is try and read the question and then write on the answer without looking at the options.
Yeah, like put a piece of paper and see what you think.
Because it will confuse you. Those options might be very close.
Then you're like,
So it's good to do that, but then the other thing that you must do is if you do write down what you think the answer is, and then you now uncover it and you look at them.
And it's not
Don't stop reading when you find your answer.
Yeah.
You must read all of the options
yeah.
because there could still be a better answer.
Yes.
And if you see your one and you go, that's it,
Yeah.
you're going to end up losing the marks.
Quite interesting chapter. I've never heard it. Which is
Yeah. Seriously, I think all of us talk about change control, talking about too much.
All of this is important in its own way. There's almost none of it's any more important than the other. Security perhaps is the sexier thing that's spoken about a whole lot. You know, these days it's cyber everything.
Yeah.
Okay? Nothing is new, yet everything is cyber new. You know, the principles haven't changed in the last 10 years, 20 years.
Probably more focus on that because it's more budget input.
Look, it's modern risk. And,
Yeah.
you know, to be honest, what's sad is that sometimes what sells is what's focused on.
Yeah.
And to say I'm doing a big data review for you, it sounds nice
Sounds
and everyone
good.
wants to buy it, but really I'm doing a data review. I'm doing normal cats. I'm mining through your data and copy matching, which we always did. We just called it cats. Now it's great.
Sounds good. Yeah.
You know, it's when I did CISA, we were talking about access of devices years ago. Now it's putting your own device. You know, it's always there.
It's just
Nicely sell. Cybersecurity was always there.
it was never
Absolutely, it's always been.
existed.
Most of these things are. So that's why in many ways, when you actually look at the book, it hasn't changed fundamentally over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Okay? When it changes is when the focus of the body of knowledge changes. And what happens is the book changes to align to the chapters, to align to the body of knowledge. The fundamental principles haven't changed, even when there's the move from COVID 4.1 to COVID 5. Okay? It's a different way of looking at things. It's a different framework, but the principles haven't changed.
Yeah. You know, Ramsey, you know that. Right?
Yes.
And he had a conversation with him one day last year at CISA this thing, and he said to me, although he's piloting cybersecurity at CSX, it's always been there. The first day you put a web application out there on the internet, you needed cybersecurity. You know, you needed to have some level of security.
Yeah.
It's just a buzzword.
Completely, it's a buzzword. But unfortunately, because everybody's using those buzzwords,
You gotta use it.
you need to use it and you need to understand. You know, the part that perhaps is changing is that the speed at which things happen. You know, things are now constantly under attack.
Yes.
You know, the moment you plug something in, the moment you connect something, you are under attack. Okay?
Ask you are you a person. You know, somebody could cover your life, and all sorts of things about you.
Yeah.
South Africans are married.
It's a reality, yeah.
Many South Africans.
How often do you check?
But I'm checking, you can check if you did or not.
Maybe a window.
You could tap your ID number in on there.
Could be a window.
Eh?
Could be a window.
Yeah. Maybe.
Probably stealing your
You've got a duplicate ID number. I mean, imagine that.
It happened to people.
Duplicate ID number.
And it happened at a time when we were writing exams, we were so able to.
No life.
And then when she went to Home Affairs, they said she needs to find this person.
Oh no.
And then they can resolve their issue together.
How
How
if they
can you
live
find this
in some remote area.
Once every time.
Yeah.
Mm.
It is scary.
So yeah, I think, you know, like chapter 4, chapter 5 still has some technical terms and elements to it, but again, you can't really get away with it. You're going to have to read it, going to have to remember some of those things, try and understand the principles behind it, try and find practical application in your life where you're using it. It's easier to remember those things. And if the concepts behind it you're struggling to understand, bring it, let's talk about it. And let's do the questions, and find in there those things that you thought you understood that you don't, and work our way through that. I think there's still a hang of a lot of questions in the database that we haven't gone through yet. Ideally, you need to try and get through as many of those, if not all of them, as possible before the exam date. That should be the target,
Makes
to
it
get through all of
handy.
those.
To get through everything twice in the database. You're not sleeping for the next month.
How do you know you've covered all the questions on the database?
If you're using the online ones or the CD, it keeps track of which questions you've answered.
Oh,
So you can tell it, only give me questions that I've never answered before.
that's what we're doing at
That's
the
what we're
moment.
doing. That's our plan.
New questions.
Yes.
And then at the end, when we finish all the new questions, we'll go back and do troubled areas.
Yeah.
And then it'll
And
give you all
it's
your
key to do
questions you
that.
got wrong.
You don't want to sit
Repeat
there and,
some of the questions.
yeah, you don't want to repeat questions while you haven't answered
If
other
you don't
questions.
select new questions. And then it takes longer to get through them all.
It took me a while to figure that one out.
Yeah, now I'm
Which I
doing it.
haven't.
Because then you can see yourself making your way through that entire list.
Yeah.
It's
That
easy
little
to-
progress bar.
We have to work for 2 hours a day in order to finish them all.
Gets kind of scary when you look at
7
it
days
like
a week.
that.
Take coffee for months.
Oh.
See for all month.
It's just less than a month.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
We have 33 days.
1 month and 1 day.
32 days.
32.
Huh?
So my
32 days.
32 days.
32 days today. That's what my CISA. That's what the database told me today.
But I have 19 days today.
I'd be more scared of Comrades than CISA.
Yeah, actually.
Say longer.
We're ending.
I'm taking that time.
In
Can you imagine?
the comments.
Construction time.
Oh, the tree down another road.
Oh, yeah.
So what is it usually, the distance? No.
Normally 87. Now it's 87.8.
The difference close to.
Yeah, everyone says, it's only a cake.
Yeah, it's the
Count the number of people on that last stretch when the gun goes off. That's how many hours are not going to make it.
No. That 12-hour bus control. You know, there's about 2,000 people who run in that bus.
If you give it a class.
12, no, the 12-hour.
It's called a 12-hour
Is it when they
bus.
hold the flag and they run? This is the
He runs
12-hour.
the flag from the start. And if you
Yes.
stick with him,
You will
he
make
will
it.
get you in that tent.
Like
20
11 hours.
past
But
5.
they have all the hours. They count down. They have all the guys running.
Almost every half
Did
hour.
you see a whole lot of people
But
come
how
in
they
at the
do that?
12
What do you mean? They
thing?
time it.
That was
There
a 5-hour
was like a
bus.
mob of people, like 30 people came in at the 4-hour mark or whatever,
Yeah.
holding the girls, holding the flag.
The guy who holds that flag is probably capable of running that race 3 or 4 hours quicker.
Yes.
Yeah.
But his role within the club
He must have
is to
some
pace
pace
all
on
this.
him because
Well, that's bad for him then. What,
No,
what would
he
make him
messes
do
up.
that? What would make
and he
him do
doesn't
that?
get those people in at 12.
He's probably got
12 hours.
30 Comrades.
Yeah.
So he doesn't
Yeah.
care. He's running Comrades to get
He's
people
being
over
paid
the line.
probably to do it.
And he's got a club and he's got a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
that's his contribution to society.
12
It's
hours
amazing.
a cut off.
12 hours.
So there's no pressure of that guy. If he goes a little bit slow,
You
no one's going to
be there
get
at
through.
half 5. They generally get in the first round that basket's never about 12 hours. It takes about 10 minutes to get all of them.
Our online viewers are probably wondering what the heck we're talking about here. So, any more questions then, or any areas of discussion?
You don't get 12 hours to write CISA, it's fine.
No,
Yeah.
only 4 hours.
There's no 12-hour bus.
You should have a 450 bus. What's past 450?
Yeah.
You should have a 450 bus. Follow me and you'll answer.
It's bad that you can't even calculate it of 200 how many questions you get you
But
for
it's
that.
scale, yeah.
It's a scale.
800, 700, isn't
800.
it? It's 450. It's scale. So you don't.
So you don't know
You
what
can't
you
even
actually need.
calculate out of
get
200
most
questions,
right
at
and fail.
least
You got the
150 will
big
get
one
me
wrong.
through or not.
It's a fantastic exam, and it's only worse than it is dying.
More positivity here, please.
I think honors is tough.
No.
Yeah,
I think
I'd rather write an exam than
I'd
study.
rather write a subject exam than this. The achievement of passing CISA is great.
Mm.
It's a ticket to a successful life, really. If you're a CISA, you should have a fairly, because of the demand for a CISA graduate, you in South Africa, around the world, you should have a fairly successful life.
For sure.
Also, you've got a global certification. If you think of any others, even your medical doctors, if they go to Europe, they've got to write an entrance exam before they practice. You as a CISA can practice anywhere in the world because it's recognized throughout the world. It's not a South African exam. The world is at stake.
Okay. Alex, you had a question there.
Oh, it was based on roles and on roles and responsibility. I was just thinking while we were going on, in terms of the committees.
Yeah.
In real life, the committees are kind of rolled into one IT steering committee. You don't really necessarily get an IT governance and IT security. So now, if I'm looking from an IT perspective, say in terms of depreciation of assets, for example, for like IT assets, I'm looking at that perspective. And then I find that they're not reporting that they don't have an IT security committee, but they're not even reporting to IT governance. Sorry, IT steering committee. Should I bring that up, or is this?
Look, you have to look at each organization, their maturity levels, and where they're at. If an organization has 5 IT employees, okay, then they probably don't have a security officer. And if they don't even have a security officer, it's highly unlikely that they're going to have an IT security steering committee. You'll be lucky if they have an IT steering committee that meets on a regular basis. So one has to look at all of that quite carefully. It's one of the complaints about the DPSA's governance requirements for government departments is that they all sit also at different maturity levels and at different sizes. So to try and create all these structures, it's not going to work. You need to do what's appropriate to achieve the business objectives and outcomes for each of those different entities. So if nobody's taking accountability for security, then that's an issue. If they don't have a security steering committee, but they are talking about it and reporting on it in the IT committee, that's fine. If they've outsourced security and they've done it properly and they've got SLAs and they've got monthly outsourced meetings and SLA meetings and they're feeding back and they're monitoring and they're reacting when they need to at appropriate times, well, then there's not an issue. But if they just wash their hands of it and say, oh, well, this is all the service provider to do, then there's an issue. So one has to just look at it carefully, trying to say, well, what should be happening? What is happening? Are the outcomes there? It's challenging, and the more experience you get at asking these questions, the easier it is to almost spot the gaps when you just walk into an organization. You can see when those things are in place and when they're not.
And then what I saw is in terms of the information security officer and the structure. Sorry. I got confused when they said the information, because I thought the information security would be high up compared to the information technology officer. You look at the
Sure. No problem. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Nice to meet you.
Bye, everyone.
Cool.
No, please do, anytime. Okay, so you're asking like the different levels of different staff.
No, I was just confused about 2 roles now.
Okay.
Because I thought information security officer
Yeah.
in terms of the overall. That's like a very high up.
It should be, but may not always be. Okay. And then the other one is the
We're also mentioned a few times in the book.
Oh, it's that? No.
Isn't it
I'm not sure where I read that thing.
security administrative information security officer? Then which one?
Information security. Yeah, there's information security officer. Okay. I'll mark it.
Yeah, mark it and then find it, because
yeah.
things like when it comes to technology officers and things like that,
Yes.
we sometimes look at them and say, well, who is this guy? What is he doing? Why is this person so high in the organization? But sometimes what happens is that they're looking not just at information technology, but all technology within the business. So if you're in a high-tech type industry, so imagine somebody making like DSTV decoders, okay? The chief technology officer would be looking at the design of the future decoders that are coming up, whether they're going to internet-enabled decoders or just use satellite transmissions, all of that kind of stuff, in addition to perhaps looking after the IT type stuff. So that guy might be one of the 2 or 3 most important people in the entire business and sit above Chief Information Security Officer, Privacy Officer, all these other kind of functions. So the nature of the business, again, and what the function of the business is, will affect how these positions all come together. Now, the reporting lines are important, but one has to look at it carefully. Independence is a key issue. So if the security officer has to report on security issues that are being raised and has to report that perhaps a perfectly functioning system, they're taking shortcuts and they're not doing things properly, and the person who's taking these shortcuts is their boss, then it makes it quite difficult. So there's a lot of argument to say that a security officer should have independent reporting lines from the CIO. But again, it depends. If there's somebody who's looking after operations and somebody who's looking after application development, and the security officer is the same level of those guys reporting into a CIO, then maybe it's okay. But they could be reporting into a governance function. One could also argue that, well, there's certain compliance functions, and compliance should be reporting completely separately. And the compliance person should be reporting if there's a lack of compliance within the security space. So you have to look at all of those elements before you can make a decision on some of these things.
That's what when I was just doing some questions on this chapter, so they like putting such examples first about an organization, and then they ask a question.
So those ones, in some cases, even though it's much more to read, it's much easier to answer that question because you have the context in which to make a decision. The ones that I find more difficult are the ones where they don't give you much information at all, and you've then almost got to give the standard answer that's per the book, and then you have to know exactly what's written in the book. Otherwise, you're going to get it wrong, even if you have experience, which would in real life let you answer the question. Okay, so on screen here are 2 links to those 2 videos. So the one is kind of about networking and how it works, and some basic description as well as physical representation of how some of these things work. And it can help sometimes to just understand some of those concepts. And then the second one is a video that Ishmael came up with, which describes the OSR model. And it's quite nice. It's, I think, like 40 minutes long. But it's mostly almost just a whiteboard and the guy going and talking and showing examples of things across all the different layers. Okay? So I think try and watch those 2 videos and then see how you're doing with the OSR model. If you go and look on YouTube or you go and look on the website, you'll find the info.
I did go to YouTube, but I only watched like a very limited one. They were like 7 minutes, 10 minutes.
Because
remember,
this discussion is being recorded. So if you go to the recording of the discussion, you'll find all the links.
Oh, okay.
And then you don't have to write it all down. But if you just search for either of those 2 names, it comes up quite quickly. So living in an OSR world, or how packets travel and network. But yeah, I would seriously recommend just going and watching those 2 videos, and then we can resume the discussion at that point, rather than trying to go through the basics again. Okay. So this week we haven't really gone through any questions in terms of actual questions and answers. we did get the opportunity at least to get Raniel's view across the 2 chapters. And I hope that was useful to everyone. Next week, we really need to focus on questions and try and get through as many of the questions as we can. So I highly recommend trying to do as many questions as you can between now and next week. And then let's spend the full 2 hours as we need going through the referrals. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much to our online viewers. I hope you guys also found it useful and were able to hear okay. Same time next week will be the next session. If you have questions that you're struggling with, take screenshots of them, pop them in a Word document, email them off, and then we can talk through those ones as well so that you can also have your questions answered. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.